These are the best and worst tactical abilities in Apex Legends Season 18. Let's get into it. Now, starting off in D tier, we have Ashe's Arc Snare. This is definitely one of the worst tacticals in the game right now. They made it better when they released her Heirloom in Season 16, but this thing needs to be rethought of. Hindering an enemy's movement with this is just super niche, to the point where when this does actually affect a fight, it's like surprisingly funny. I think the best part about this ability is probably the 20 damage it can deal. If you can hit an enemy with it and quickly play off the damage and the fact that they'll be confined to that circular area of the snare, then you might win that battle. But by and far, it doesn't do a heck of a lot to turn the fight in your favor, and I wish they would look at how they could make this better. Next is Ballistic's Whistler. Now, I've been playing a lot of Ballistic this season, and I gotta say, this ability is by far my least favorite part about his kit. First off, I'm not a huge fan of something overheating a player's weapon, as after all, this is a first-person shooter game. And although that's just my opinion, they clearly can't make this ability too good, or else it would just be such a ridiculous concept for the game itself. But putting that aside, the Whistler did receive some nerfs at the beginning of the season when it comes to how long it will overheat a player's weapon for. But to me, the greater problem is just the inconsistency when it comes to making contact with an enemy. If you hit direct contact, it will deal 20 damage and then eventually overheat the weapon, or it could deal up to 5 damage if it's not direct contact. And you could get that yellow indicator which will signal that it will connect, and then somehow, some way, it just does not. If a piece of geo gets in the way, it might block it. If the player moves a certain way, it just won't connect. So you need to be fairly close to play off of this, make sure it connects to the enemy, and then make sure that the enemy doesn't disengage so that they can't avoid the overheating of the weapon in order for this to help you out a ton during a fight. And last in D tier is Seer's Focus of Attention. In the matter of a few weeks, this ability went from S tier all the way down to D tier. Now, there could be an argument made for it to go into C tier, but I'm not going to be that generous. It's way too easy for enemies to avoid getting hit by this thing now, and the stun only lasts for half a second. That's down from 2.5 seconds previously. Now, yes, it can still silence an enemy's abilities for 8 seconds if you connect on one of them, so that can prove to be very helpful during a fight. But I think making this tactical connect is what's hanging it up for me. And for the record, I'm glad this ability was tuned back a notch. For that second half of last season, this thing was extremely overpowered and didn't make a ton of sense for it to be that good in this game, especially considering how they essentially took Revenant's old tactical and gave it to Seer, just in a different way. Revenant's tactical was never as good as Seer's was for that second half of last season. Moving on to the C tier legends. First up is Valkyrie's Missile Swarm. This is certainly not as good as it once was. When Valkyrie was first released, this ability was definitely a lot better. However, it can still be a subtle addition to a gunfight. It will deal around 25 damage and stun your enemy for a brief time. It can also cover a decent amount of space and has some pretty good range on it. However, enemies can usually avoid this pretty easily, making it not super valuable. Second is Mirage, and I know a lot of people think Mirage is trash and his tactical might not be the best, but it still can dupe a lot of players. And even better, a couple seasons ago, they added the visual indicator of where an enemy is shooting your decoy from, so if you make a quick read, you can catch an enemy slipping and land the first blow on them. Decoys also have a very short cooldown, allowing for you to spam them often, or even have one by your side nearly at all times. It's not even close to one of the best abilities, but the fact that you can have it often makes up for some of its weakness. Third is Caustic's gas traps. These are also not nearly as good as they once were. With them being able to be destroyed even once they're activated now, it has taken away a lot of what made Caustic traps so difficult to deal with in the first place. I'm not saying it was a bad move for Apex to do this, but it certainly has made Caustic not as good as a result. He still can provide value when you are holding down an area that doesn't have too many different lines of sight, and also when you're in a structure like the zipline buildings where you can place traps in and around the entry and exit points. But when you compare Caustic to another controller legend, his gas traps just aren't as strong. Fourth is Crypto. Crypto's an interesting one because his drone is heavily related to his other abilities, more so than really any other legend. So without his drone, he really has no abilities. The cooldown on his drone if it gets destroyed is 30 seconds, and this is a bit too long in my eyes considering Horizon can float up 400 feet in the air more than once in less time than it would take for Crypto to get his drone back. Anyways, this ability is okay. It's obviously helpful to plant in an area when you're pushing a team, to scan a beacon and see how many teams are where, and to obviously scout ahead. Crypto could definitely use a buff to make him more in line with other legends. I don't know exactly what they could do, but I would start with reducing the cooldown on his drone if it gets destroyed. Next is Rampart's Amped Cover. Now, I know a lot of players love Rampart, and her Amped Cover can certainly be good. It's just that the amount of times where this is going to be extremely extremely valuable is not super often. You're going to have to stay stationary, which yes, could be helpful, but that already eliminates a ton of situations. If you get behind the amped cover and your enemy is silly enough to walk in front of it, then you should have a pretty easy kill. Not to mention, her amped cover assists with Sheila if you have both going on at the same time. I know a lot of players say you can super glide off Rampart's amped cover. I mean, I've never seen a Rampart do that in my games. It's obviously possible, but we're talking about a very, very small use case here. And recently when I was using her, it was not allowing me to recall the walls, which is one big problem a lot of Rampart players make. They set up an area with a few different walls, they leave that area, all of a sudden enemies take that area over, and then boom, they're using your abilities against you. I don't love this aspect because this doesn't really happen with any of the other controller legends, so it would be cool to see if like Rampart's walls only worked for her and her teammates, and potentially like an enemy Rampart as well. Doing something like that would make her walls much, much better. All right, second to last is Wattson's perimeter security, aka her fences. Now, Wattson's fences are really good when you're going up a zip line and it's fenced off and you get stunned and the Watson's waiting to one clip you. Watson's fences overall do not appear to be very strong. I know there are some cracked Watson content creators. I know in certain areas she can shine, but broadly speaking, her fences are not as widely applicable as some other abilities. And she's really similar to Rampart in that way. So yes, you get her in the right spot, in the right place, those fences may be more valuable. But broadly speaking, they aren't going to move the mark a ton in a fight. Not to mention, at times her fences don't connect as well as I'd like them to. I think that is a little bit of an annoying factor when it comes to the learning curve of Watson. Experienced Watsons don't really deal with this because they've mastered her, but for the average Watson player, I think when you set two nodes up and they don't connect for whatever weird reason, that takes away from like, oh, this legend is more complicated than I'd like her to be. Last in C tier is going to be Newcastle's mobile shield. A lot of y'all are going to disagree with Newcastle's placement here, and while I think he's a stronger legend than C tier in most use cases, I think his tactical isn't amazing. Up close with a shotgun, yeah, it's going to prove to be pretty strong. If you have to move a small amount of distance and you want to move that shield with you, yeah, that can be helpful. Or if you need to avoid an airstrike or something like that, this tactical is helpful. But moving the shield at times doesn't always work as you'd like it to, and it can also be destroyed. It doesn't take a ton of damage for an enemy to destroy half that shield, rendering you very vulnerable if you're caught out in the open while trying to move with it. And I think the better parts about Newcastle are probably his other abilities. However, his tactical does complement that passive and that ultimate very well. Moving on to B tier. First up, I have Vantage's Echo Relocation. Now, at times, this can kind of be annoying to have to constantly recall Echo for when you need to use this ability, but honestly, in terms of movement tacticals, it's pretty smooth. It's not always going to be helpful, especially if you're indoors and you hit your head on the ceiling or get caught on something like that, but it's a nice repositioning ability. I actually think if Vantage's hitbox was reduced slightly and they buffed her ult even just a little bit, she would become much, much more popular. This tactical could honestly be an A tier ability, but it's on a C tier legend. So for right now, I'm putting it in B tier, but just with the understanding that if Vantage got changed even a little bit, this would make her tactical that much more better. Second is Octane's Stim. And I know I usually rank Octane pretty low, but for his tactical, it's pretty good. It's really just how people misuse it that gives it the bad rep. It does have a fairly slow regen, takes a good amount of your health, but if you use him in the mixtape playlist, he heals back even quicker. The Stim is good for repositioning, engaging aggressively, combining it with other movement tech in the game, and it's also pretty good to disengage with if you can quickly break line of sight. Now, every legend moves at the same speed, so when we have to fight a legend that is going 30% faster, it can really throw off some of that muscle memory when it comes to tracking, and as a result, the opposing player will probably miss some shots. But ultimately, this tactical becomes much, much better when it's combined with other movement tech in the game. Next in B tier is Mad Maggie's Riot Drill, and this ability becomes a lot better with Maggie's passive. I really enjoy using this ability, especially when it's being used with an aggressive run and gun playstyle. Playing cover is such an important part to Apex, as most of you know, so when Maggie's ability can briefly eliminate some or even all of that cover that an enemy is utilizing, well, it can turn out to be very beneficial. If they're low and they continue to play behind that cover, the drill can just knock them. But it also works similar to grenades and other offensive abilities that can just make the player move out of their cover and into your line of sight, or make them pay the price with the damage that they will be dealt if they choose to stay. When you get this ability right, it feels very satisfying to use. The main reason I don't have it in A tier is because sometimes when you use it and you place it behind some piece of cover, for some reason the enemy doesn't get hit by it despite the visual indication of flames coming through the other side. I think it has to do with the amount of depth that the drill goes through, but regardless, it's still a pretty good ability in Apex Season 18. Now, speaking of something similar is going to be Fuse's Knuckle Cluster. I think when Fuse is going up against any of the controller legends, he can cause some havoc with this ability. Being able to set off gas traps, Watson fences, or break down a catalyst enforced door, well, this can be huge. Right now, those legends will probably be picked more in ranked rather than pubs, so Fuse's use case could go up in that mode. A lot of you guys ask, what am I basing these tier lists on? Is it ranked? Is it pubs? Is it mixtape? It's usually pubs, ranked, and mixtapes kind of in the back seat. However, because Horizon is so popular and some of these other movement legends too, Fuse doesn't really stand up too well against a lot of these other legends. I will say Fuse's Knuckle Cluster is probably the best part about his kit, maybe next to his passive. It's certainly not going to be his ultimate. If you learn how to time this Knuckle Cluster and combo it with his other abilities, well, that's when you can really see some damage numbers stack up. Lastly, in B tier is going to be Lifeline's Doc Heal Drone. Now, I know Lifeline doesn't get a lot of love, but this thing is awesome to have during a fight and definitely after a fight. It's especially helpful for a quick reset when you get the drone right after getting revived. You can then quickly armor swap, and within a few seconds, you're basically fully healed up and you could be ready for another fight if you got pushed. I love the small improvements that they've made to the drone over the last few seasons, and I think it's a great ability for sure. A lot of people tend to write off Lifeline because her revive isn't as good as it once was, but things like her drone have definitely improved. And I think this is one of the best abilities when it comes to dealing with third parties or being really aggressive and having to fight. All right, now we're moving on to A tier, some of the best tacticals in the game. First up is Revenant's new Shadow Pounce. This thing is really fun, and at first I thought it felt a little clunky, but once I got the hang of the audio and the hand animations lighting up to signal that you're at the max distance you can go, I think it's pretty sweet. Is it a lot like Vantage's tactical? Yeah, it is. But there's a lot of potential for some crazy movement tech with this ability, and I'm sure you've probably already seen some of it. Now, I can't really do any of it because it's mostly mouse and keyboard stuff, but it looks very OP when I see it done successfully. There's a 25-second static cooldown on this ability, and I have seen some complaints, I guess, from players who would say that they wish that it was a variable cooldown, kind of like how Pathfinder's grapple is. Now, I think they didn't do that for a couple reasons, but I don't really know why. However, putting that aside for a moment, this thing is definitely very fun. It's a refreshing ability to try out, especially on a legend like Revenant, who we've all been fairly accustomed to. So I think it's good to be aggressive with, but you got to be a little careful because you don't want Revenant to turn into the new Octane. What I mean by that is you don't want to go in headfirst to a three-man team very far ahead of your teammates only to get knocked and then probably leave the game. So if you're just mindful of that, you'll see the fun you can have with this ability. Second is Wraith's Phase. Now, if all the attention is on you, it's not going to be too good, as enemies will just follow you in your queue. But if there's other things there to take the heat off you, like nearby enemies, teammates, etc., this ability is pretty damn good. It's also, of course, a great pair with her ultimate, as it removes that activation time on her Q if Wraith uses her ultimate first and then Qs in the portal. It's 4 seconds of her in this phase where she can't take any damage, and she gets a bit of a speed boost as well. It's a helpful repositioning tool, not a get out of jail free card. Be careful of the terrain around you, as if you bounce into a wall or something like that while you're activating her Q, it will cancel it. This can be a tough thing that a lot of Wraiths have to deal with if they jump, hit their Q, hit the wall, and it cancels. Third is Bloodhound's Scan. Now, the scan is really helpful for just knowing what's in front of you. I mean, it's a wall hack after all, pretty self-explanatory. But people do complain about Bloodhound not getting a million scans during their ultimate anymore, and I gotta say, I'm glad they changed this. Bloodhound got value in a different area in exchange for not just being this constant scan bot legend. It takes more skill before, because if you miss the scan during the ult, there's a lot more of a consequence to it. You gotta time it correctly and look in the right direction. This ability is extremely helpful to get a read on how close your enemies are, how many there are, and much more. I think it's one of the best abilities in the game, and I'm leaving it in A tier for now. Next is Loba's Bracelet. Now, this ability is not typically used to be super aggressive with, as it's not something you want to be caught doing the last part of the animation while an enemy is staring at you with their weapon out. It also has a 25-second cooldown similar to Revenant's ult, and I think it is interesting that they decrease this cooldown at the same time of releasing Revenant Reborn. They are similar abilities, but with Loba's you get a little bit more of that teleportation aspect. You can go through windows, you can go through fine areas, things like that. I do like being aggressive with it if I can get myself to a safe vantage point ahead of time on top of a roof or something like that, but I always avoid queuing into direct line of sight. Now, queuing out of fights is also something that's very popular, especially throughout these last couple seasons, now that Loba is the only support legend that has this movement ability per se. You couple that with the fact that she can craft banners for her teammates, and in ranked, she becomes a pretty annoying legend to go up against. For all of those reasons, I'm going A tier. I would go S tier with this ability only if it was a little bit more lengthy and it had better verticality to it. Now, second to last in A tier, I have Gibraltar's Dome of Protection, aka the Bubble. This ability is very strong, especially in this season where shotguns are strong. It covers a great amount of space. There's a lot of outplay abilities that are attached with it, getting in and out of the bubble, bubbling on a door, bubbling close to something that you need to create some space and make a small rotation with, getting those Gibraltar revives off in it, avoiding airstrikes. I mean, this ability can be really helpful in so many different scenarios. It does have a fairly long cooldown, but it lasts for a decent while. We don't see a ton of Gibbies, although I have seen his pick rate go up a little bit this season. But when Gibby uses this ability, you got to be careful because certain Gibraltars really know how to play around a bubble well. The last ability I have in A tier is Bangalore's Smoke Launcher. Now, this ability is just solid all around. It's great at disengaging so you can back off and heal for a moment, and it's also great to get that annoying guy to stop longbowing you from across the damn map. Now, with 2 charges on this and about a 30-second cooldown, you can make a decent amount happen with it. This tactical ability instantly becomes better when Bangalore or one of her teammates has a digital threat so that they can beam through the smoke. But the opposite can also be true, so watch out for that. If you smoke and don't have a digital threat but your opponent does, you might be getting beamed and wondering if that player is cheating. Overall, A tier ability. Before I move on to S tier, I want to tell you about something very important. Aura is the all-in-one digital security app, and they're the sponsor of today's video. If you're tired of constantly receiving spam phone calls to the point where you don't even answer your phone anymore, well, listen up. Data brokers are making a fortune selling your information to robocallers, spammers, and others who want to learn more about you, like where you live, what you're up to, and much more. Aura, however, can identify data brokers exposing your info and submit opt-out requests on your behalf. Brokers are legally required to remove your info if you ask them to, but they make it super hard to pull this off. So let Aura handle it for you. Click the link in the description, aura.com/mangoes, or go ahead and scan the QR code on the screen to get a 14-day free trial and see if your personal information has been compromised. Thanks again to Aura for sponsoring this video. All right, now finally we're at S tier, the best of the best in terms of tactical abilities. First is Catalyst Piercing Spikes. This thing can go under doors, it occupies so much space, can only be destroyed up close, and it has to be in the center of the spike at the orb. It takes like 250 or 300 damage to destroy. It's going to deal 15 damage per tick to an enemy, and because it goes underneath you, it can take you out way worse than a Watson Fence or a Caustic Trap in the broad amount of scenarios. With those other abilities, you have to walk into them, but this ability can just be on you all of a sudden. There's been so many times where I've been playing a door and all of a sudden a Catalyst throws her Q, it goes under the door, it starts spiking me, I have to give up the door, she opens the door, shoots me in the back, it's just a mess. I wish it wouldn't go through doors, but that's a whole other thing. Regardless, this ability is top tier. The only downside is sometimes when an enemy gets close to it but isn't in the spikes necessarily, the spikes go up a good amount and can be about center mass on some legends, so it can actually wind up eating some of your bullets. That's the only thing to look out for, but beyond that, top tier ability. Second is Horizon's Gravity Lift. This is just incredibly overpowered right now. I mean, Horizon's been meta for what feels like forever. This ability offers so much utility, not only for Horizon, but also her squad mates. It doesn't require a huge skill gap like some of the other movement abilities, and there's a lot that she can do when she reaches the top of the Gravity Lift. She can use it to heal, she can use it to reposition herself and or her entire team. She can use it to throw her ultimate from. She can use it to buy some space, create a distraction, gun down an enemy. I mean, the fact that she can heal in this, use her weapons, use her ultimate, all makes this thing incredibly overpowered. It is a bit tiring these days to deal with a Horizon and her Gravity Lift, but they have tried to tweak it in the past. I assume they will do something in the future here soon. We'll just have to wait and see. For now, S tier ability. Lastly, in S tier is Pathfinder's Grapple. grapple. This is just the best ability in the game, hands down. It's the most fun ability to get good at. It's very rewarding when you learn the nuances of it, when you learn to jump, when the grapple connects, when you learn to grapple things above you and do a sweeping grapple. It honestly has so much potential. I think people are still figuring out ways to be insane with this ability. And honestly, when I think of Pathfinder's grapple, I just think of Apex. Now, with all of that said, if you enjoyed this video, then you're definitely going to want to learn about the best and worst weapons this season. Be sure to check out this video next. Thanks for watching. Peace.